pretty exciting. Pretty pumped.
Speaking pretty pumped, Bill and I are pretty pumped to talk about some TNG this morning. How you doing this morning, Bill?
Doing really well. Happy to be back. 2 weeks in a row talking TNG, which we haven't talked about in a long time. We haven't
Yep.
done like a TNG kind of focused conversation, and I don't even know how long. It's been a really long time. So yeah, and it kind of coincides with your rewatch. Like we're specifically kind of
Yes.
tackling this point in the show because of where you are with um, rewatching the show. So um, I guess my first question to you is, what do you think of season three as a whole? Kind of just jumping right into it because this is kind of like a mix of like our normal beginning routine of like talking about our rewatches. We're kind of just building a whole show around
Yep.
the rewatch status.
Yes.
Um, so I'm curious because we haven't really talked a whole lot like about it generally. What do you think of season three as a whole?
Um, as far as season three, I think it's almost a turning point for the show. For you guys
Mhm.
that aren't kind of keeping up on like Twitter and just past shows, rewatching the Next Generation, and I'm on I think the last episode I think
Mhm.
of season
Yep.
three, and yeah, it's season three to me feels very different. There was a definitely a change that I can see from seasons one and two.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, which is really yeah. I mean, they're if you study the production of TNG, there's a lot of really obvious big changes that happen between seasons two and three. There's a lot of tumult and changeover and turnover, whatever you want to call it, people coming and going. The
Yep.
first two seasons on the production level in the writers' room, show kind of, I don't want to say like struggling to find its footing, but definitely working to establish itself. We'll say like
Mhm.
um, trying to find the balance with writers that are going to stick and writers that maybe not work out. Um, so in between the second and third seasons, they kind of purged the writers' room. Most of the people that were on the writing staff through the second season or going back to the first season left the show. Maurice Hurley ran the writers' room from like the second half of the first season through the second season. So it was like he was a showrunner, and he left pretty much between seasons two and three. And Michael Piller eventually became the showrunner for season three, and he was kind of the voice of the show. Not even just TNG, but Deep Space Nine and Voyager. He co-created both of those shows, and kind of
Mhm.
ran both of them as they got off the ground. So like the next like 5 or 6 or 7 years of Star Trek on television kind of start in season three with
Yep.
some of those consistent voices kind of coming into their own and getting into their roles. Ron Moore shows up in season three. He becomes a regular writer.
Yep.
Um, the cinematographer and the production designer, the costume designer, like all of these like integral roles in like shaping what we think of as like 90s Star Trek kind of all arrive uh, in season three. So, uh, it, did you notice like those production elements kind of kick up a notch when you started season three? Things like the cinematography and
I
the costume design.
I definitely did. I think that
Hmm.
you can see kind of the early um, kind of stuff, the just the early like I don't know
Hmm.
things we see later on in Trek. This is
Yeah.
kind of where they started, and I think that
Right.
um, Bill, you and I were talking about kind of shaking up in a show, and I think this was kind of a shake up in the show, and I think
Hmm.
it did probably take some guts to do, but I
Yeah.
think it paid off in the end.
Yeah. I think, for example, to me, there's something about the costume design, like just the uniform change, that there's something in the difference between like the obviously like spandex one piece uniform of the first two seasons
Mhm.
moving into the more, I don't even know how to describe it. I guess more formal, more
The two-piece collar. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
they look more professional and look a little bit more comfortable. Like they're clearly more comfortable. Like there's no
Yes.
doubt. But there's something about that change that just like is like undeniably impactful on the show. Like the actors look more comfortable, and uh, it just it makes a discernible difference for me.
Yeah.
That costume change, and I don't think it's necessarily just because it's like what I'm used to. Like if you think of TNG as a whole, the vast majority of it takes place in those uniforms. So I think your mind kind of goes to that's the picture in your head when you think of the Next Generation. But I think it's a noticeable improvement on all kinds of levels. I think it looks better. It looks more comfortable. The actors look better. I think it looks more believably like a semi sort of military organization might wear something like this as opposed to what they were wearing in the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
It just worked better than what they were doing. And I think the cinematography looks better. I think they do more with like shadow, and everything doesn't have to be so brightly lit. Like in season one, when I think of season one, I think of like everything is like very bright and
Yep.
like kind of I certainly didn't study cinematography, so I'm not sure of the terminology or anything like that. But it's just everything seems more like just vast and light, basking and light. Where in season three, I think they're a little bit more ambitious with, using shadow and darkness to make it more visually interesting.
Yeah.
But there's a definite change in the visual dynamic of the show going into season three.
Yep.
That I think pays off pretty well. The other thing that I know that Michael Piller, I've seen him in interviews. Like if anybody out there has the TNG Blu-rays, there's archival interviews and stuff in that where they talk about things like this. The change going into season three. And one of the rules that Piller, as the new showrunner, kind of laid out for the third season was that they weren't going to really have episodes that were completely focused on a guest star or like the alien of the week. All of the episodes had to have a focus on like one of the main characters, which is kind of what Star Trek kind of ended up becoming. Like I think especially in those 90s shows, it's really easy to point to episodes of like the Next Generation as, okay, this is a Crusher episode, this is a Worf episode, this is a Data episode. And I think that trait kind of becomes more apparent in the third season because of that directive. They weren't going to have episodes like from back in the first season. I think of like Too Short a Season, where there's like the admiral who's de-aging, and the whole episode's kind of driven by that guest star playing that admiral. Like that's really who the episode's about, and the crew is kind of pushing his story along. Season three, the idea was to not do that anymore and make sure that the driving force in the story is going to be one of the main characters. And so I think that's a noticeable difference for the show.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because I had that in my notes. I think that just the episode structure went from kind of, like you said, Alien of the Week to kind of focus more on one single character or a few. And I think that helped the show because I think it gave more freedom for the writers, and it helped it was nice because we could explore the character more. And I think that definitely really helped the show for me, is to kind of explore the characters more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is where the characters really kind of come into their own. I think certain characters like Picard and Data, Riker to a certain extent, certainly had, a lot to do in the first 2 seasons, and they had a good bit of character development. We got to know them pretty well. But I do think these deep dives that we kind of get from season 3 onward, where like entire hours are kind of dedicated to, looking at these different characters from different angles, it helps these characters become who we end up getting to know as the show goes on. Adam's telling us that our names are flipped somehow. I think I know why, but we'll forgive.
Yeah.
No big deal. Thanks for pointing it out, though, Adam. I think I know why that happened. I think it's because I started the call, Dan.
Okay.
I think it flipped over. But appreciate you giving us that heads up, and welcome, Adam.
Morning.
Good show. Good morning.
Good to see you.
Yeah, for sure. A question that I'd definitely like to kind of pose to you, since you're kind of coming up on the end. You haven't watched season finale yet, which is a huge one, the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like an obvious fan favorite. But discounting that because you're kind of saving that to watch both parts, right? You were telling me
yeah, both. I like to do both parts.
Yeah. So what are the episodes that stand out to you? Like, are there episodes from season 3 that you knew I was going to ask this?
Yeah, I know. And I have a list. I just gotta grab it.
Because I think one of the good things about season 3 is when I think of seasons 1 and 2, there's a lot of good stuff, but the real big standout episodes there's a handful of them that like really come to mind for me, like Measure of a Man from season 2 or Q-Who and Conspiracy from season 1. Like there's a handful that really stand out. But season 3, you get into season 3 and they kind of come one after another. Like there's the list of like, wow, that was a really great episode, starts to get longer than it maybe was in the first 2 seasons. So I'm curious to know like which ones kind of like pop out in your head as, man, that was really good. Like that demonstrates the uptick in quality that we kind of get in season 3.
I mean, obviously, I think the one that kind of jumped out at me first when you asked it is The Offspring.
Yeah.
That, to me, I always kind of gravitate towards the more emotional episodes. And I think that looking back at season 1 and 2, there were definitely some episodes that made me kind of emote, but this one was kind of up at the top, I think, yeah. And I think that kind of run of episodes there, A Matter of Perspective, Yesterday's Enterprise, Sins of Our Father, were a great run of episodes. I think Yesterday's Enterprise feels really big.
For sure.
It feels like a really big production. It almost feels like a two-parter, but it's not.
Yeah. Right.
But
there's a lot packed into that hour.
Yeah, I mean, when I look back at it, there's so many great solid episodes in this season. I think for me, I always forget about this season, and I always kind of focus on the later seasons of TNG and stuff. So yeah, there's just a bunch of them. Captain's Holiday, Tin Man, Hollow Pursuits.
Hollow Pursuits is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a long list. To be honest,
put them all together, yeah.
Yeah, when you look at the season kind of top to bottom, I think of certainly The Offspring is one that really quickly comes to mind because I do think it, even for TNG as a whole and maybe even Star Trek as a whole, I think it's one of the more like tearjerkery, like just purely emotional hours of Star Trek you're gonna get. Like it goes to some pretty dark places and it has a really kind of downer ending. But it's maybe my favorite Brent Spiner performance. I think he's incredible in it. I think the actress who plays Lal, his daughter, is awesome. It's really good. And it kind of, like I said, I think it's a unique one because of how unabashedly emotional it is. I think Star Trek can sometimes feel, and this is not like really a criticism, it's just kind of the personality of what Trek is, that I don't want to say it's like stilted, but like, swinging for the fences emotionally like that is not something that you always get. Like sometimes the emotional stuff comes more subtly in Trek. This is one that is swinging for the fences in that respect. And I think maybe what you just did, kind of naming that run of episodes, when you think of like those are episodes that kind of all run in sequence. I'm thinking of like Matter of Perspective, which is like a retelling of Rashomon, like a classic Japanese movie about telling things from different perspectives and how everybody's got their own version of events. That's a neat episode that is its own thing. And then Yesterday's Enterprise is like a whole different thing. Huge production with, big time production value and, big time travel story and big science fiction concept. And then The Offspring is like this little intimate character story. And then right after that, Sins of the Father, which is like a huge Klingon thing that's kind of building on the lore of the Klingons and is a great character episode for Worf. Like they all have very distinct personalities. Like
lots
these are
of
not
variety.
Yeah. Like the thing I always kind of talk about that I kind of steal from Brian and Braga when he talks about Star Trek, that you can watch Star Trek kind of weekly, and if you don't know what the next episode is, you don't really know what's coming. Like it's not like a lot of the best TV shows out there where when you tune into Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or Game of Thrones, when you sit down to watch it, you kind of know what to expect. Like from a tone standpoint, you kind of know the sort of story you're going to get. But with a show like Star Trek: The Next Generation, especially when you get into this part of the show, the third season, you might get The Offspring, you might get Yesterday's Enterprise, and they are, you know, on paper they kind of have no business coming from the same show. Like they're completely different kinds of hours of TV. And I love that about Star Trek. I think that's what makes Star Trek unique, that it can tackle all kinds of genres and tones and styles, and they all kind of fit in the same universe and function side by side like that.
Do you miss that in current TV? I know this isn't really kind of Star Trek. Well, it kind of is, because Discovery is kind of more the opposite, where it's more serialized and you kind of know what to expect kind of next week.
Sure.
And then just in other than Trek, other TV shows, it's more serialized. So, what do you think?
It is. Yeah, it's definitely something that I feel like I kind of miss. But I think it's kind of unique. It's always been kind of unique to Star Trek, even like non-serialized shows, like, you know, procedural shows. Like if you're a CSI fan or something, I can't say I'm a CSI speaker. I never really did. I would, you know, maybe see a little bit of it here or there, but that's not a serialized show. But when you sit down to watch CSI, you kind of know exactly what the formula is. You know what you're going to get. It's a mystery, and it's going to get solved in the hour, and you know, it's just a matter of how they get there.
Yeah.
Star Trek's always been kind of an anomaly like that, but I have definitely missed that since, you know, growing up watching it week to week as a young kid. And Discovery, I've talked about this before, I think it maybe applies more to the first half of the season than it does the second. But I think one of the things that Discovery's first season did well was that it, at least in that part of the season, I think it did kind of accomplish some of that. I think, you know, an episode like Lethe feels very different than an episode like Choose Your Pain and Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. Like they do kind of, they're certainly serialized and it is a continuing story. But I think in that first half of the season, when you go through it episode by episode, like I just did in the last couple of weeks, I've been pleasantly surprised by how well some of those episodes do kind of offer, you know, a flavor of their own in a way that kind of mirrors what TNG, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, even Enterprise did. So I do miss it. I don't think it's something that was ever necessarily super common on TV other than Star Trek. But I just think because of the nature of, you know, how TV shows work, they drop you into a set of characters in, you know, telling their story. It's kind of difficult to do that, to shift tones like that. But something about the nature of Star Trek, the storytelling opportunities that come to light because of what Trek is, allows it to do that if it wants to. I think it's a unique Trek thing, but I do absolutely, of course, miss it. And I think it's part of, like I've said many times, why I love Star Trek as much as I do, because it can do all kinds of things. It's a Swiss Army knife. What, I know I'm probably putting you on the spot here. I didn't give you any warning.
That's what makes for the best conversation.
Yeah. When you think, like, if you look at an episode list from season 3, if you think back to, because I know for you, because you've had a lot going on in the last couple of months, this rewatch of this season, it took place over a pretty extended period of time. Like, you started season 3 a little while ago, so it's not like this is over the course of a week or two here that you watched this season. But if you think back and you try to think of just the third season, who's the character or the characters that you think maybe benefited the most from kind of the shift in tone for the season? Like who comes out at the end of season 3 the most better off than they were before season 3 started, as far as just like how well the character works, or how well you know the character, how well you like the character?
I think for me, it's kind of like the crew that's not kind of in the chairs and in the front of in the bridge. It's Worf, it's Troy. I mean, it's Geordi. I mean, he gets a little rocky at some points in the season, but I think that this shift from it, to me, Star Trek was always kind of an entourage show, but I think they shine the light more on the back end characters, and I think to me that just kind of adds to the show when we can explore the whole crew, not just kind of Picard, Riker, Data. You know, I think that the kind of the back half crew that don't get as much spotlight, I think they benefited from the shift the most. So
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
bringing Crusher back and Wesley and yeah, like I mentioned, all the other Worf and yeah, so
Hmm.
those characters, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think the way that the show was structured in the first two seasons, where it wasn't necessarily, aimed as much at let's develop this character in this hour. The way the storylines were developed is, sometimes being driven by a guest star or the culture of the week, um, lent itself to Picard and Riker and Data kind of being in the forefront, and some of those other characters being a little less aggressively developed. So I think having this new approach with episodes I'm thinking of episodes like the bonding even for Worf, which isn't maybe like necessarily like a Worf episode where he's dealing with, the crewman who died and has a kid on the ship.
Yeah.
Worf's got some really good development there.
Yep.
And obviously Sins of the Father, like Worf gets a couple of hours of this season that he really gets like good stuff to chew on. So, and same thing with Geordi. Geordi gets like the episode with his holographic
The booby trap.
crush, booby trap.
I like
He's
that
got,
episode.
me too. That's up
Yeah.
there for me. He's really good in that.
Yeah.
The enemy when he's stranded on the planet with the Romulan, he's really good in that.
Great episode.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think characters like that get a little more of the spotlight because they get dedicated episodes here and there.
Mhm.
And I just think the writing's sharper in general. Like even when they do kind of pop in for a scene in an episode that's not necessarily driven by them, they're more impactful scenes. Like they're more substantive scenes that actually help the character out a little bit.
Mhm.
Adam's saying he was thinking of Worf.
Yep,
in the
totally
chat
agree, Adam.
for that question. And I think Worf's a good answer. I do think Worf kind of comes into his own in this season. I think in the first two seasons, he sometimes, especially in the first season, Worf is kind of really relegated. Yar is the security chief still. He's kind of just popping in and out. He's in an away mission every so often. He gets to, yell about we should attack that ship, we should fire, and Picard tells him no. Like scenes like that are kind
Shuts
of
him
Worf's
down every episode.
shut down constantly. That's his thing. That's all he really does.
Mhm.
And then in the second season, he's in security and all, but he kind of sometimes I think feels like he's relegated to being aggressive and having to get shot down by Picard, and he gets a funny line here or there, not necessarily as consistently interesting. But in season 3, I think they really take the character a little bit more seriously. I think of like the enemy. They have the Romulan on the ship too, who's dying and needs a blood transfusion, and Worf doesn't want to do it and doesn't do it. Like there are major character turning points for Worf in this season, and he I think really elevates into like the classic Star Trek character that I think of. I think that really kind of kicks off in the third season when the writing gets a little tighter.
Yeah, I think the combination of just great writing and then, to me, it almost takes a season or two for actors to kind of settle
Sure.
into their role. So I think that the combination of that and great writing, I think, just makes for a great season.
Yeah, I think if you look at all the Star Trek shows across the, with maybe the exception of TOS, for some of them, most of these actors get considerably better as the shows go on, or at least there's a point usually around the second or third season where you can point to and go, okay, they really get it. I'm thinking of, I think Brent Spiner's like that. I think Michael Dorn's like that. I think they hit a point around that end of the second, beginning of the third season where they are just locked in. And up until that point, I think they were good. I think they did a good job all through the show, but there's a noticeable uptick that happens, or a noticeable like light switch gets flicked.
Yep.
I think Jolene Blalock as T'Pol has that. I think there becomes a point where she kind of clicks and becomes, consistently excellent. There are random, I think, actor. I think the best, and I'm kind of not related to TNG, but I think the actor who gets it the best from like the first moment they're seen on screen is Shatner as Kirk. Like the first time you see Shatner as Kirk in the very first episode, the first pilot, the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before. He is Kirk immediately, and he's Kirk the entire time.
He feels like Kirk.
he nails him immediately. But I don't think that's the case for a lot of the best actors that have been in Star Trek. I think a lot of them needed time to develop over time. So yeah, I think another question I kind of have for you as somebody who kind of just went through this season and season 2 before this, you kind of touched on it. a couple minutes ago, is Dr. Crusher coming back. Like,
Yep.
how do you think? Where do you fall on the whole Pulaski Crusher thing? Like, do you prefer Crusher? Do you prefer Pulaski? Do you think the show gets really benefits from Crusher's presence? I mean,
I'm Team Crusher.
yeah.
Kind of always was.
Mm-hmm.
To me, she does feel a little underutilized, but I think that it's kind of cool to kind of explore and have that relationship with Picard, and
Yeah.
so that's why I kind of like her, kind of on the ship, and so yeah, I'm Team Crusher for sure.
I agree
I
with
don't
you
know if
completely.
she I don't know if she had a really polarizing effect on the show. I just think that she has kind of aspects in her character that were kind of cool to explore. So, yeah.
Agreed. I think one of the things that I wish TNG did better was I think Crusher is a character who could have stood for a lot more development, because I think when she gets the spotlight, I think when she gets episodes that really drive the show, I think she's really, really good. I think the actress is great. Gates McFadden. I think the best thing about the character, maybe unfortunately for her, because it's not really about her, is the dynamic with Picard. I think that added wrinkle to Picard's character, that will they, won't they, how do they really feel dynamic is something that adds to Picard's character and adds to the overall texture of the show in a positive way. I think was missing in the second season. So I think McFadden's great. I wish she had more to do as an independent character, but I think the Picard dynamic is really a plus for the show as a whole.
Yeah.
It's not there every single episode. It's not there all the time, but when it pops in, when that dynamic gets explored and you get a little scene here or there, I think it really works. And I think it's a mature aspect of the show. I think it's something that happens in real life. I think Star Trek's explored that in other ways too, like we talked about last week with Janeway and Chakotay, like these will they, won't they, like these unspoken kind of mutual attractions that are complicated and never really come to light, like they never get fully explored. I think people in life experience those kinds of things, and and they're difficult to do dramatically, in a satisfying way. And the show struggles with that. I don't think it is like completely dramatically satisfying, because they never do have that moment, really. But I appreciate that Star Trek, over the course of its multiple shows, has toyed with that dynamic that I do think happens in real life, to people. So,
as far as Pulaski, I think that would be a cool like a mini series to do, because that character, I like that character. She's very, very qualified. Yeah, and I think she had good banter with the captain and the crew.
Yeah.
So I think I don't want to bash the character. So
yeah, I agree with you. I think the easy criticism that a lot of people have is they feel like it's trying to kind of ape the McCoy thing, like the curmudgeon-y, grumpy character who's not afraid of the chain of command, like will speak their mind to the captain, and rubs people the wrong way sometimes. Like, in a lot of ways, they were kind of trying to capture that element. I think maybe one of the self-diagnoses that they made in the first season was that they were missing that kind of element. There was a lot of effort going in, kind of wipe the show clean of conflict. Like, that was one of Roddenberry's things. Like, the characters were not going to be in conflict. They weren't going to fight with each other. Humanity's beyond that. There's no arguing with each other. There's none of that tension is going to be there. And that's problematic in a lot of ways for a TV show, for drama to work. The characters have to have some kind of tension. And I think their way to try to, inject some of that into the show is that create Pulaski, who brings some of that McCoy stuff. But I do think when I watch the second season, I think that's overly simplistic. Like, there are some of those elements, but I do think Pulaski kind of thing. I don't, when I'm watching the show, I don't sit there and think, man, she's just a McCoy clone. Like, I do think she has her own interesting quirks and character traits and it's a different kind of dynamic with Picard than Crusher has. I think Crusher's more interesting at the end of the day, but I think she did have a unique chemistry with Picard.
And Riker's dad.
And Riker's dad, very. Yeah, so there's a lot to chew on with Pulaski, and I think it would have been interesting to see her develop further. But I'm glad at the end of the day, I'm on Team Crusher too. At the end, like if I had to pick between the two characters, which one are we going to get from season 3 on? I would pick Crusher every single time. I'm glad they did so. So, yeah. Do you think? I don't know if I've ever asked you this on air or off, but where do you fall on the Wesley Crusher question? Wesley Crusher is clearly like the most, at least he used to be. I don't, maybe he's not anymore, but like the most maligned Star Trek character. People have major issues with Wesley Crusher. I have my own thoughts on it, but I'm curious, like, where do you fall? Question of Wesley, and like, first, he's just having watched it now that you've seen the majority of what Wesley brings to the table. He leaves pretty early on in season 4. Spoiler alert. For a 25-year-old show, but you've seen by now. You've seen the vast majority of the Wesley stuff. Yeah. So at this point in the show, like, how do you feel about the character? Do you think he's fairly or unfairly maligned? Like, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I want to stay positive. To me, he's a little annoying, and I think it's kind of a cool dynamic to try to, I think, bring the audience into like a certain kind of age group into the audience with kind of like the teen to early, 20s. In my head, I like to think as realistically as possible as far as like canon and would this actually happen. I don't know if you're gonna have kind of you would have ensigns on the flagship of the Federation,
right?
But an ensign that hasn't been to the to the academy,
sitting at the helm.
So
yeah, it's got issues for sure. I think what I like about it is I like in Where No One Has Gone Before very early on, like this uniquely did and is his understanding of like his instinctual understanding of like warp theory and time and how it all kind of comes together is like Mozart's understanding of music. Like, this is a person who's uniquely gifted and needs to be cultivated. Like the Traveler tells Picard, you need to build him up, and that's why he's on the bridge. Picard knows from the Traveler's unique perspective that Wesley is this person who could become like the very best of his field of that thing, so Picard feels a responsibility to, and I like that dynamic too. Like, he feels a unique responsibility to Wesley Crusher and Crusher's husband and all. Like, there's a whole interesting thing there. The issue, I think, is in the first season they sort of sabotage the character by putting the crew in situations where they resolve episodes by having Wesley and have Wesley be the smartest person, outsmarting the crew, like seeing through, that it's not Data, it's Lore, for example, like in Data Lore. Like, Wesley's the only one that can kind of piece that together. Like, things like that really do damage to Wesley's character, and in the minds of the audience, I think it becomes irritating and not credible. So I think that's where a lot of the negative comes from. But I think by the third season, I think they've kind of gone away from that. There are not very many episodes where Wesley is saving the day. He's more just kind of the intern. Like, he's there and he's learning, and I think they make better use of the character, but unfortunately, I think the people had already passed judgment by that point. Through the first season mostly. So I'm kind of mixed on the character. I think they made a lot of big mistakes early on, made it difficult to salvage the character in a lot of people's minds. But he does not bother me, really, after the second season, like into the second season. Beyond the first season, where they're kind of kind of constantly going back to that. He's saving the crew,
Yeah.
kind of thing. He's not like a net negative for me in most ways.
Yeah. I do think that he has some interesting episodes with him kind of learning like the challenges of command and
Sure. Yeah.
stuff like that. So I think I'm not totally like super negative on him. I'm just a little bit. I'm not in the middle, but a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I put myself in the same place.
Yeah.
He's clearly he's the least good character that's on the show right now.
Yeah.
You know, and by this point, like he's definitely the character that's the most expendable. He's clearly the weak link. But he has good moments. I'm thinking of that, like I mentioned, the Bond. You know, the kid's mom gets killed in the away mission, and they're kind of dealing with that. And
Yeah.
Wesley's got some good scenes with Beverly about bringing back memories of, dealing with his dad dying, and he's got some good scenes in the third season that are a little bit more mature than before. I think that the writing, like it helped all these other characters, it helped Wesley too. Crisp and mature and serious, and I think he had some decent things to do by this point in the show.
Yeah.
Rob's asking us if we've read Death in Winter, which I know they just did on the Trek Book Club. I kind of followed the discussion, but I have not read it, unfortunately. And it tackles Picard and Crusher's dynamic that we were kind of talking about. So I am interested in that. I would love about that whole relationship and why things didn't ever really happen. So it's in the overwhelmingly massive pile of that I'm curious about reading, like the just dawningly unapproachable pile. It's high up on that pile, like it's towards the top. So one of these days I hope to grab it. I think we even have it. I think it's in the house, so it's accessible is not the problem. It's just which one do I read? But yeah, very good to know. And trying to think, what else do I want to know about season 3?
I've got a question.
Sure.
Where does this rank in TNG for you, and why? I know I put you on the spot. Let's go a big open-ended question, but
I think I would honestly say it's my favorite season of. I think the overwhelmingly long list of like episodes that I wholeheartedly love is so long, and maybe it's because when I tend to watch the show, I watch it in sequence. So the contrast from seasons 1 and 2 into this is so jarring to me. Like the production things, the cinematography, the things like even in the first episode, I remember always thinking like, not even the uniforms, but the scientist, Paul Stubbs is his name. He's the guy who's trying to conduct this experiment. He's annoying, like typical Star Trek character who's up to no good. He just what he's wearing is so much more credible than like the typical Star Trek Next Generation guest star in the first 2 seasons. Like it's something that a person might wear. Like it's a sweater and like a suit style kind of thing. Like it's not a ridiculous costume that sometimes you get in early Next Generation. Things like that are just so jarring in contrast to what you get in the first 2 seasons. And then you look at the list of, I love The Survivor. I love Who Watches the Watchers. I love Booby Trap and The Enemy. I love The Defector, Deja Q, that run of episodes you were just talking about with Yesterday's Enterprise through Sins of the Father, Hollow Pursuits, Sarek. I love Sarek. And the season finale is like an all-time great Star Trek episode, Best of Both Worlds. I think there are more classics in the 3rd season than maybe any other Star Trek, maybe with the exception of the 1st season of the original series. So I'll say this: when I did the last rewatch and I'd like averaged everything out, the only season that was higher than TNG was the 1st season of TOS. So they were my 2 favorite, statistically speaking, seasons of Star Trek overall. So I'm comfortable saying that it's my favorite season of The Next Generation.
Okay.
Yeah. Rob saying that The Offspring is his favorite episode, and we kind of talked about that, and that's kind of the episode that came to mind for you.
Yeah, that was the first episode.
That's
It's a great episode.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, my favorite thing in that episode is that last scene when Lyle says "I love you" to Data, and just Spiner's performance when you can see that he wants to say it but just can't.
Yeah.
Cannot say it. Is just heartbreaking and definitely like an all-time Star Trek moment for me. And like I said earlier, I think it's Spiner's best individual performance as Data. You're just ironing it down to like what's the best episode that he had. That's the one for me. You wanted to show like an outsider, somebody who never watched Star Trek before. You know, something about Data. Like if you were trying to introduce Data to something, that's the episode.
Yeah.
You got to show.
Yeah.
For show off. Yeah, there is an Andorian in the holodeck. It does have like a green pen. It's unusual. Fran would be most displeased, Rob.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I think that is the only time we see an Andorian, right? Though, like other than Enterprise and the original series.
I think so. Yeah.
I think it is. So I could be wrong, but yeah, that episode's full of good stuff. I mean, did it without? I just to kind of sum it up. Like, would you comfortably say that it is? Maybe the Andorian's got too much sun.
That's awesome, Adam.
Yeah, very funny. Do you think how much better than the first two seasons is it really for you? Like, is it really noticeable? Like, is it overstated how much better it is? Is it exaggerated, or is it really like considerably better, like a different show?
I think it's almost a different show. I don't want to knock season 1 and 2 because there are some great moments, some great episodes, and it has merits. But I think
definitely
I'm not gonna say day and night. It's like morning and afternoon, I guess, if that makes any sense.
It does.
I think there's just a really big noticeable change for the better. So I agree.
Yeah. I agree. I think that morning and afternoon is a really apt way to put it. I do think day and night, I think, is an unfair, because I do like the first two seasons of The Next Generation. They have their own unique charm to it. It's its own thing. There's a lot of successful things. There are a lot of successful things that come out of those two seasons. So I don't want to make it sound like, first two seasons are bad, season 3 is good.
Yeah.
So I think the way you put it is more of an accurate representation for how I feel, because I do enjoy both. I think it's a noticeable change. I think there's a clear, visible change in all kinds of ways. But yeah, I don't want to knock the first two seasons too much.
Yeah, Rob, we talked about Pulaski a little bit earlier. Phil and I are both kind of team Crusher, but we do see the merits of her character.
Yeah, I think Pulaski's too easily knocked.
Yes.
Rob, I think too many people discount her too easily. I like Crusher more. I think she brings more to the show's overall dynamic. I think she's a more interesting character overall, but I do think with more development and more, if Pulaski would have stayed, I think she would have been just fine. I think she was a good character.
Yep.
On her own. Yeah, so I know we wanted to kind of keep this a little shorter than some of our previous episodes. We're coming up on 45 minutes, so
yes,
we want to start wrapping it up. We kind of touched base. We talked about a lot of different episodes, a lot of different highlights. I kind of went through a little mini list. You definitely talked about episodes that stood out to you. We talked about characters that we think benefited the most from the season, the change. We talked about the production changes and cinematography, costumes, all that stuff. So I think we covered a good bit. Any just final thoughts on the season? Not to end on a negative note. Can I ask you one more thing actually before you do that?
Okay, I have a spiel that I get to go about. Yeah, just go.
Before I do this, before we do that, what's your least favorite episode of the season?
Oh, I'd have to look. It's hard because there's so many. When there's just episodes that are just solid,
Yeah, I agree. There's not many misses.
I'm not a big Ferengi fan, so I'll let you guys kind of see where I'm going there. I think that even then, there's some things that I like about that episode specifically. But yeah.
You're talking about the price, or are you talking about Menage a Troy?
Menage a Troy.
Yes. Yeah, that would be my least favorite.
I like the dynamic with them. You know, they're going on vacation, but I'm like, is that just that was, to me, it was kind of out of nowhere. So it was, I don't know. And I'm not big on Ferengi until Deep Space Nine. So yeah. As far as just kind of wrapping up my overall thoughts, I think that this is the best thing that this season was probably the best thing that ever could have happened to this show, because I think this just starts the momentum of this show almost. I think that, you know, there were some rumblings obviously in season 1 and 2, but this is where I think that the momentum just carries throughout the show, and you feel that in the later seasons. So I think this is, to me, this is the turning point of the show, I think.
It is. Couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is where the show becomes the Next Generation, the way that people largely think of the Next Generation. I see a lot of people, like on Twitter, will comment like when they rewatch TNG, they kind of just start with season 3, which I don't necessarily think is the right thing to do. I don't do that.
Yeah.
But I can see why somebody would, you know, because this is where TNG proper kind of becomes TNG proper.
Yeah.
Like it's the Next Generation in the vision that people think of what the Next Generation was. The way that the stories are told with these, you know, episodes that focus on individual characters, and kind of they rotate through the crew, and everybody gets 1 or 2 or 3 through the season, and a little more mature, a little more serious writing, a little heavier, less afraid of, you know, being emotional with episodes like The Offspring, and the bonding, you know, certainly tries to tap into some of that stuff. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the takeaway is pretty clear that this is, you know, like you said, a huge turning point for the Next Generation, and really for Star Trek as a whole. I think this is where not even just the Next Generation became the show that people think of. I think it's where modern Star Trek, or I guess it's not modern anymore, it's the 90s era Star Trek, TNG through Enterprise, the Rick Berman era, became what people, you know, think of when they think of that period of, you know, Star Trek. I think this is where it materialized into what people visualize in their head as what that Star Trek was. So yeah. So do we want to wrap up with a podcast? Do you have any podcasts you want to shout out? Anything you listened to in the last week? I've had a busy week, so
crazy busy with work. So I haven't had a chance to kind of listen to podcasts, and my commute is much shorter, so that's when I used to catch up on podcasts, was my commute. So I'm kind of but I need to catch up. What about you? Do you have any that you've been listening to?
As far as Star Trek goes, I think I'll shout out Trek Ranks, like always. I haven't listened to the brand new one. I think one just came out about the Romulans. Like favorite Romulan episodes. I haven't gotten to that one yet, but I did listen to the Kira Nerys episode, everybody's top 5 episodes for Kira. In the last, I think that was in the last week. It might have been 2 weeks ago, but really, really good episode of Trek Ranks. And I think that's really about it. I've been listening to a lot of movie stuff, some fantasy football prep stuff. So I have a little bit of a backlog of Trek content out there. Rob is talking about Trek Geeks, who I also love, and I usually
we've been listening to those for a while.
Yeah, they're great. Really genuine guys.
Such a great rapport.
Yeah, really good stuff. Rob got to appear on The Edge. I saw you talking about that on Twitter, that you were a guest on the postcards from The Edge, right, Rob? Where you kind of read everybody's feedback and everyone's thoughts on the trailer, I think it was, for season 2.
I agree, Rob. You got to make a career almost to try to keep up with everything.
Yeah, there's a lot of guilt on my end of things. There's so much good stuff out there, but there's so many hours in the day, and it's difficult to hit everything. And I think I try to spread it out as much as I can. And sometimes I end up missing episodes of certain shows because I'm trying to spread the love and listen to everybody. I love Trek Geeks. I love Mission Log. I love everything on Trek FM. I love Dad's podcast, the Delta Flyer,
Yep.
for example. Like there's just no end. Like there's some that I'm not naming that I also to all the because they're not just popping into my head. I could just read my podcast app.
Yeah.
Just go down the list. But it is overwhelming, and it is it could be a full-time job.
Yeah. That being said, we really appreciate you guys kind of stopping in to watch, listen live. Rob and Adam, you guys make the show. I think we're gonna,
appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, we're gonna wind it down. If you have any more questions, not just about TNG season 3, just anything, definitely stop over. All our information is down in the description. Discord, we got a great kind of Discord chat going. Yeah, the discussion doesn't have to stop here. Like I always say every week. Next week will be probably a little bit change up on the schedule. It'll be on Sunday, probably mid to kind of later afternoon. As far as Pacific time. So yeah. But we'll keep you guys updated on Twitter, so definitely follow. That's been episode 57. We'll catch you guys next week.
Yep, thanks for watching.